It was unsettling to see my father in a suit. His beard was unusually kempt and trimmed, his bouncy Jufro surprisingly tame and adorned with a white silk yarmulke, bobby-pinned a little off-center. He was wearing a loud, wide 1970s necktie, no longer remotely in style now that it was 1984. He opened his face into a big, dopey grin, his yellow smoker's teeth glowing in the dim light of the synagogue antechamber where I stood waiting by myself. "Hey, kiddo." "Look at you," I whispered, "all dressed up." My freshly tightened braces caused my words to slur a bit. He nodded and gave an amused shrug as he looked around. "I feel like I'm in the other team's locker room," he said. He wiggled his shoulders in an exaggerated shudder. We could hear the rabbi talking to the congregation on the other side of the curtain beside us. "You still have time to change your mind, you know. Jilt God at the altar and keep your integrity." "You had a bar mitzvah," I said. "You survived." He rocked his head back and forth. "Perhaps." "I am kind of nervous," I confessed. "I'll be glad when the reading is over." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Relax. Have fun. Remember, religion is nothing but a human construct. Plus, from here on in, you get to make your own rules." I smiled back at him, not really understanding. He continued, "That's at least a little consolation for, being a man now." He winked, and then, looking around to ensure that we were alone, he slipped a small, fat envelope into my hand. "And of course, this will help too." I looked down and spread the top of the envelope open with my thumb and finger. Inside were 3 chubby marijuana joints. They smelled glorious. "Happy birthday, buddy." I grinned, covering for the guilt of holding the contraband right there in the synagogue. He turned to leave. "Don't, just keep it from your sister." "Of course," I said, trying to play it cool, tickled to share a secret with him, already trying on the posture of what I thought adulthood required. He nodded and headed back out, disappearing just as the cantor appeared, waving me to step on stage. "Come on, it's time." I stuffed the envelope into my inside suit pocket, took a breath, and tried to steady myself, but the grin kept fighting its way back to my face. The cantor led me through the curtain, and I stepped up to the bima, where an ornate Torah was splayed out. We had rehearsed all this, but still, I started to sweat. I thrust my hand into my pocket and made a fist. The rabbi laid his heavy hand on my shoulder. "Bar mitzvah is both blessing and obligation. I was overjoyed when young Michael here came to us, determined to find his own way, to mark his passage into adulthood with me and with all of you." I looked out at the audience, all my friends sitting politely and patiently, at my 18-year-old sister Anais with her over-earnest, over-encouraging smile, and at my mom beside her in the front row, gritting her teeth with anxiety on my behalf, and probably focused most on how her rich, successful brother and his perfect family were judging our Ungapachka attempt to pretend we were normal. My mom was ambivalent about her Judaism. As a toddler, during the Holocaust, safely growing up in Queens, she remained blissfully unaware of the horrors being committed, least of all her own family's connection to it. Her parents never spoke of their religion, until at 13 she came upon her father crying after a meeting with a doctor who knew people from the old country. Only then was she forced to absorb the reality of why she had no relatives on her father's side. For me, Judaism was a part of my identity that I understood to be a little bit unfortunate, like a cleft palate or being short, something that made me different but that I could compensate for with wit or mathematical acumen. I didn't know anything about bar mitzvahs until my friends started having these elaborate parties and getting showered with gifts and savings bonds. Best of all, a bar mitzvah was an excuse to invite all the girls from school to a party where I'd be the center of attention. I wanted in. Dad slipped into the sanctuary through a side door and managed to trip over and knock down a stack of collapsed folding chairs lined up along the side aisle, creating a cascading eruption of noise and garnering the attention of everybody in the room. He flashed a quick smile and a quick wave to the congregation, and making no effort to clean up the mess, he scanned the seats for a place to sit. The rabbi continued, trying to overcome the distraction. And so, it's quite fortuitous that today's passage is one about self-determination above all things, and about duty to oneself, to one's family, and to God. He nodded grandly at me, a cue for me to begin, but I just stood there frozen. He moved his hand from my shoulder to the small of my back and forcibly pulled me forward a step. "Begin whenever you're ready," he grunted. I watched my dad make his way to his seat in the third row, forcing a few of my classmates to get up to let him pass. He was smugly oblivious to my struggle to muster the courage to speak, to proceed with this thing, this commitment I had made, perhaps despite him, though my teenage emotions were hardly coherent enough for me to consciously recognize that. And he finally sat down, of all places, right next to my Goy crush, Mary Ann O'Malley. I cleared my throat and began my memorized Hebrew. The rabbi stuffed the yod into my hand, and then with his hand on top of mine, roughly dragged the pointer along the hand-drawn glyphs on the scroll. As I spoke, he unconsciously mouthed the reading along with me, occasionally vocalizing that plosive sound so common in Hebrew. When I next looked up, my eyes went straight to that third pew 4 seats in, and I watched as my dad leaned over and whispered something in Mary Ann's ear, making her blush. She covered her face with her hand as she tried to stifle a laugh. I darted my eyes back down to the scroll and closed them as I struggled through the last few stanzas. God, please make him die, I thought.